Hello, men. Welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation, Anshe Emet. And joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanofsky, Anshe Chesed, New York City, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter, Day School of Long Island. We are marking 537 days. We're recording this on day 537 now of the captivity of the hostages with the war resumed. And of course, a renewed and deeper concern for their safety and well-being. We are fervently praying that they are released, that they will be released as soon as possible. The families enduring such anguish as they uh, as they look to any sign of life of the remaining 59 hostages, 24 of whom are believed to be alive. And so we pray for them as always and look to Torah to anchor our lives as we mark this time, as we mark time. And here we are. We are at Parshat Pekudei. We are completing the Book of Shmot. So, in a sense, this is a milestone for us. I always like to point out that once we complete a book, any of the five books, these are milestones in the course of the year. So, two-fifths of the reading of the Torah will have been completed by the end of this week. And it also coincides this week with HaChodesh, Shabbat HaChodesh. The name Shabbat HaChodesh, we get that from the first word of, well, the words beginning in chapter 12 of the Book of Shmot, which is the special maftir, this being the fourth of the special Shabbatot prior to Pesach. And we'll talk about that in a second. Um, and it strikes me that there is a link between Pekudei and HaChodesh. And I'm going to say that this is the lowest of the hanging fruit because in Parshat Pekudei, of course, we get the accounting of all of the materials that are used to make the Mishkan. And that itself is a fascinating thing. But once we get to chapter 40, verse 17 in the book, and I'm just turning to it, I had it open before, but I'm going to open it again. It says as follows. Vayihi b'chodesh harishon, and it was on the first month, b'shana hashenit, in the second year, be'achad b'chodesh, on the first day of the month, hukama mishkan. The Mishkan was raised. It came into being. And we can press pause here because I think it's fascinating. It's fascinating, A, that there is a clock going on in the Torah itself, and that the ground zero of the clock is Nisan, the first month. And that the first moment that we are really, pressing the start button on the clock is the first day of Nisan. And we've gone all the way around the clock to the first day of the first month in the second year. So, what is the significance then of having completed the Mishkan on the first day of the first month? This can't be an accident. Uh, this is deliberate. So, what is the Torah trying to tell us here? Why is the Mishkan placed in this time? And what does it open up for us in terms of how we think about time, how we think about time in general in the Torah? And maybe we can draw some kind of contrast between other moments in the history of Israel that involve not the Mishkan, but maybe the Mikdash. They come at different points. So I'm just going to open it up to anyone who wants to jump in here and just kind of react to this in a sense of what does it to me it says Darshuni, like interpret me. Give me give me give me your best comment. Why Nissan? Why Mishkan? What's going on here? Barry,
Okay.
to you.
So Nissan, I think first of all, is the springtime. And the springtime is almost always associated with the time of beginning, of dreams realized and hopes fulfilled. And I think that's part of what's going on here. And I think that One of the things that I don't know that we often spend enough time doing is thinking of the five books of the Torah as books unto themselves first, before they're part of the Torah. And each book has its own theme. And, when we read the Torah during the year in the synagogue, there's 11 parshiot, 12 parshiot, we read it kind of chopped up. And so perhaps we emphasize things due to our weekly reading that are not necessarily emphasized when we read the book from beginning to end. And I think of the Mishkan as being the culmination of the Exodus. That's why it's the last thing in the book. And it's also why there's that connection with the first of Nisan, because by having the Mishkan erected on the first of Nisan, it's harkening back to the first commandment given to the Israelites, as noted by Rashi in his opening comment on the Torah, and that is that Nisan should be the first month. So HaChodesh begins the Exodus process. We get the first instructions about the Paschal Lamb. And here it's worth pointing out that Passover, the first Passover, was certainly a home ritual because there was no temple to bring a sacrifice to. And it was a diaspora ritual because the Jews were in Egypt, not in Eretz Israel. And through the vagaries of history, after the destruction of the Second Temple, it became a home ritual again. That's what the Seder is. But I think that the frame here is that the purpose of the Exodus is to get to the Mishkan, that we are liberated from Egypt in order to serve God in the appropriate way.
So isn't that interesting, that you say that? And of course, I think the data, it proves that because the book ends with the Mishkan, but we are very used to saying that the purpose of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus of Egypt, is to get to Sinai and to hear and to receive the Torah. So, Jeremy, I wonder if you could, reflect on this. What are the markers for us? What's key for us? Is it
Uh,
Sinai? Or is it the Mishkan? Or maybe something else?
well, I mean, I think a univocal answer is out of the question because when you're asking me about the book of Exodus that we have before us, or are we is that the discussion, or is the discussion Judaism as we've inherited it, right? Um, it seems clear to me that in the book of Exodus, what Barry just said is correct. Uh, the point was to, was not to get out of Egypt because in the way that only an American could say, oh, that slavery is wrong and freedom is good and this is the holiday of Exodus from Egyptian oppression. That's not the Bible's principal claim. The Shlachtami v'abduni, let my people go so that they may serve me. And the service does involve, and is obviously as Judaism as it has been inherited, the service goes through the path is through Mount Sinai, and the collection of mitzvot, which do include these mitzvot about the Mishkan and worship, but they also include, here's what happens if one person steals from another, and here's what happens if there's a dispute, over property rights or uh, and ethical stuff like justice pursue and love your neighbor as yourself and all those. That's part of worship. But it seems to me correct to say that the worship that the Book of Exodus envisions is the creation of a sacred place with lots of beautiful stuff, and that God says, "I will meet you between the Kruvim." The cherubs on top of the ark are a kind of throne for the invisible God. Nachmanides, my favorite of the Bible commentators, writes an introduction to this book, the Book of Exodus, in which he says, "Okay, here's the point. The point is that back in Genesis, your ancestors, they were totally on God's page. They were very close. God spoke to them all the time. God made covenants with them. That was much diminished by exile and slavery in Egypt. And the point is to get Israel, the nation, back to the place where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were, of steady, regular contact with Hashem. And the reason that the book ends on such a strong note is that that's achieved. The last lines of Exodus are that God so filled the Mishkan that even Moses couldn't enter, and then Leviticus begins with God bringing Moses in. It's a total triumph, except that whole story requires some asterisks. We've talked in the past about the relationship of the golden calf to the Mishkan. Is the Mishkan, as Rashi suggests, the Mishkan is like Plan B after the golden calf throws it off. As Nachmanides suggests, no, that cannot be, because in his way of looking at it, the point is to create this place where you can meet and speak with and connect to the divine.
It's so interesting, because we are rabbinic Jews, and therefore, you know, in our religious lives, our religious lives are certainly focused on worship and synagogue behavior. Especially in the diaspora, our lives, as community Jews, do figure into the framework of communal institutions, namely the synagogue. The synagogue is not the Mishkan, though. If we are to identify the organizing principle of our lives, it wouldn't be a place. In fact, it would be a book. And in fact, it would be, an imaginary place, which is Sinai, that we, as rabbinic Jews, are always trying to invoke Sinai on a daily basis, um, in terms of how Sinai speaks to us and Sinai guides us through Torah. And that doesn't seem to be the case in the Torah itself. The Torah, and then certainly later on in the Tanakh, makes very, very few references to Sinai, makes very few references to the Sinai event, other than a good space of the book of Dvarim at the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, where there is a recollection, a rather detailed recollection of Sinai. Go read the book of Joshua. Go read the book of Judges. Go read the book of Samuel, Kings, all the way down, and you won't get much of a mention of Sinai there. I just wanted to, get
No,
your
I
reflections on it.
want to, yeah, I want to note about that one of a famous passage in the Talmud says that there was a period um, when the before the temple was destroyed, when Shacharit involved reciting our three paragraphs of Shema as we have them, and the key part of the third paragraph of the Shema from Numbers 15 is that you remember that I'm going to get there in a second. The point of the third paragraph of the Shema is to remember that I took you out of the land of Egypt. So you have God's unity, you have the love of God, you have the service of God through mitzvot in the second paragraph. You have remember that I took you out of Egypt in the third paragraph. And there was a time when Jews also recited the Ten Commandments, and according to the Talmud, there was a period in which they decided to cease saying the Ten Commandments because some heretics, presumably Jewish Christians, said, well, the Ten Commandments are valid, but the other mitzvot are not valid. And 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 so Jews ceased reciting the Ten Commandments. Now, in the Talmud's description of that crossroads, that event, it's not asking the question as you phrase it, Elliot, but the question that you asked is right at the heart of that discussion.
Right.
What's the Judaism that we practice? What came out of that is we practice the Judaism that as a daily basis has Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, that has a remembrance of slavery, has a remembrance of liberation, and doesn't have. I mean, I suppose it has in the bracha of Ahava Rabbah, it has a sense that God, you loved us so much that you that you taught us and gave us mitzvot, and we're very grateful for that. But that was a decision at a certain point not to put Exodus chapter 20 at the heart of Jewish consciousness.
So Mishkan is at the heart. At least if you're, you know, I want to always look at the person who has experienced this in real time. In real time, if this is 1 year after the Exodus on that very month, you're quite happy, I guess, having experienced a lot of things in that year, including the Exodus, the splitting of the sea, the arrival at Sinai, the revelation of God at Sinai, the golden calf, the shattering of the tablets, Moses going back up there, the all of the instructions for the tabernacle, the building of the tabernacle, the collecting of the material, the building of the tabernacle over a course of several months, and the manna, of course, and the food that is sustaining them, the water episodes, the war of Amalek. A lot of things have happened, and you get to this month and you're going like, wow, look at all these things that happen in a year, and lahavdil a million times, we marked a while ago, the anniversary of October 7th. That was back in October. So we're 537 days now. We're almost a year and a half, literally, close to a year and a half, and marking time and understanding that from that moment another clock started for us, marking days. So here the people are thinking about, we have arrived. We're at the anniversary of the Exodus. I
We
want
got a
to.
couple, we got a couple of other things to weave into that calendar that you just said. So if I can
Yeah,
amplify
go
just
ahead.
a teeny bit, it's the 17th of Tammuz. So they get on the first day of Rosh Chodesh Nisan, they get a calendar, and they get a prospective mitzvah that they're supposed to do beginning in another 10 days. They're supposed to designate their lambs for sacrifice. Then another 5 days or 4 days go by, and they have the sacrifice, and they have the celebration, and they mark their doorposts and all that business, and then they leave on the 15th. And if we follow tradition, it's on the seventh day of Pesach that they cross the Red Sea. So it's the 21st or so, 20, I guess 21st of Nisan. So all that was an incredibly eventful 3 weeks. Um, while it is true that Sinai does not get, while it's true that Sinai does not get the huge fanfare throughout the whole Torah, it's also true that Shavuot, which does happen exactly 7 weeks after Passover, which happens that way, even, it's in Exodus 19, it's not explicit that it's the sixth day of that month. They arrive at Mount Sinai on the first. They arrive at Mount Sinai, Rosh Chodesh, Sivan, and they go up. Moses goes up the mountain, down the mountain, up the mountain, down the mountain. So whether the Torah itself conceives of it as, you know, 5 days or 6 days or 7 days, it's not exactly explicit, but it's pretty close. That is 49 days after leaving the Egypt that they come to Mount Sinai. And so the coincidence, the Shavuot in the Torah is purely an agricultural holiday. It doesn't have any reference to the giving of Sinai, the giving of Torah at Sinai. While technically true, the dates line up perfectly. So you have Shavuot and the giving of the Torah roughly on 49 days later, on the 6th of Sivan or so. Moses goes up the mountain. On the 17th of Tammuz, he comes back down and finds them worshiping the golden calf. He smashes the golden calf. He hangs out for another month, almost, goes back up on Tisha B'Av, comes back down with new tablets on Yom Kippur, and then we're going to spend the rest of that winter building the Mishkan, and as you said, dedicating it and erecting it on the first day of that next Nisan. But I got one more but. Rashi and the other commentators, Ibn Ezra and Nachmanides, they don't all have the same position, and they quote different rabbinic sources, but this is the eighth day of dedication. That is to say, those final days at the tail end of Adar, the Nisi'im, the chieftains, are bringing their various wagons full of goodies, and they have their big, gigantic dedication. And this is not only this day we're reading about right now in Exodus 40, on that day, Moses sets up the Mishkan, is also the day of Nadav and Abihu. It's the
Yeah,
eighth.
it is so complicated. There are two different approaches to that the event that resulted in the calamitous death of Nadav and Abihu happened on the 8th of Nisan, and there are those who believe that it happened on the 1st of Nisan, and all of these things are converging really at the same time, and it's confusing for us in that this is the month, and we could say also that isn't it interesting the way the Torah patterns for us this elation and catastrophe all at the same time, that we go from the high point of Sinai to the low point of the golden calf, from
Right, but
dedication of the sanctuary to the calamity of Nadav and Abihu. But you were
I
saying,
don't know that it's necessarily by accident. But one way to look at the golden calf is that the golden calf is the sin associated with Revelation. It's the sin at Sinai. Nadav and Avihu is the sin that's associated with the Mishkan.
yeah.
And, you know, what it suggests is that there is a very high price to pay for the great good things in our religious lives.
So
In order to get the Torah, you take the risk of a golden calf. And in order to erect the Mishkan, you possibly lose two of your main
more points.
staff people.
So I want to tie a thread between this parsha and Chodesh, which we are making reference to, um, and that is when it says HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, this is your month. So the Mishkan being erected in this month gives it a kind of another encapsulation of how personal and intimate this experience is for the people. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, this is your month. And this is your Mishkan. This is your Mishkan, Israel. And I want to go back to Barry, what you said before, which is the you know the sacrifice that took place, or the slaughter of the animals, um, took place in their homes, and this is because there's no Mishkan. There's no place of pilgrimage. There's no place to do this. In fact, I would go one step further. That chapter 12, which is the special maftir for this week, really is a kind of primitive formation of the home as a mini Mishkan, if you will, in that not only does the blood as a multivocal symbol represent protection, but the blood, when you place the blood on your doorpost and on your lintel, you're kind of sanctifying your home, and you're making it into a temporary mizbeach, a temporary altar, a temporary mishkan. And so what you have is it's a roasted. You have a hearth that is functioning as an altar. You have your mishkan. You have your home functioning as a kind of mini sanctuary, and the people functioning as priests because they slaughter, they burn, they roast, they eat a kind of korban zevach shlamim, which is the korban pesach is functioning that way, and we have the almost the nucleus of the Mishkan in the first Nisan, the first Passover, and then but by the time we get to the second Passover, which is coming up, 15 days or 14 days after the erection of the Mishkan here, we're already established in some ways as a nation.
So what I would add here is that the blood is not just to keep the mashchit, the destroyer, out, it's to enable holiness to come in. And that, I think, supports your reading that there's an element of consecration. And there's also a wonderful irony here, because what was the claim that Moses made? Let my people go so that we could go worship our God outside of your domain, Pharaoh. And Pharaoh refuses. And what happens? We'll worship our God here in your domain
Right.
with your sacred animal. And the calendar, I think, reflects an element of cosmos as opposed to what I understand to be the chaos of a slave's life, because the slave cannot order his or her own life. So even though there might be irregularity, it's a disordered life. The calendar is what's going to create cosmos, ordered space and time with which free human beings can function.
I just want to point to one thing of one interesting contrast, which is, the Mishkan, and here we framed it as a very, intimate space. It's a small space, when you think about it. And in the Book of Kings, chapter 8, after a long period in which Israel or God has no home, 480 years, Solomon builds the temple. That the building of the temple starts in the month of Ziv. That is a source in chapter 6 of the Book of Kings. But by chapter 8, the temple is built, and Solomon dedicates it. And he does not dedicate it in Nisan. He dedicates it in the seventh month, which is Tishrei. So what I would propose is that the meaning has shifted for Solomon. The sanctuary, the Mishkan, is an intimate place. The Mikdash is a much more grand and public place. It is a place of assembly, and a place not only that is private to Israel and God, but it's a place really for the whole world. And that
I think
Solomon is really aware of this, and that Solomon is taking advantage of a natural rhythm in the calendar, in the seasons of life in Israel, which is that by the time Tishrei comes around, your harvest is done. You have a little more time. You're not rushing back to your fields to do more harvesting. You're ready to celebrate. You're ready to have a party, basically.
see that thing you just said now. So it is a kind of a feature of the way Jews have talked about Sukkot and the Beit Hamikdash, um, as being, public and world facing as opposed to the private covenantal space of Am Yisrael. I mean, I'm not really sure how deeply I find that layered in, but I would try what I think is a much more modest claim about this, which is that in ancient Israel, it seems to me that there were, two sort of narratives. Like some of those holidays, like you hear about the kings, and nobody celebrated Passover like this until,
Right? Yeah.
and nobody celebrated Sukkot like this until King so. So if you look in Parshat Emor, which is what we read on the holidays, uh, in in Leviticus, I guess this is 23. Um, it describes Passover as an agricultural festival, and it describes Shavuot as an agricultural festival, and it says Sukkot, ki b'Sukkot hoshavti et b'nei Yisrael b'hotzi'i otam me'eretz Mitzrayim, because I made them dwell in booths when I took them out of Egypt. And so if you open up Leviticus 23, you see this shocking thing that you have some agricultural holidays, and the one that is about the Exodus from Egypt is Sukkot. And it's just like, what now? Well, in this religion, Sukkot is not the memory of going out of Egypt, but maybe the Solomon story and the dedication of the Beit Hamikdash in the fall at Sukkot, the subsequent rededication in immediate post-biblical Jewish history of the Chashmonaim at Hanukkah, which also takes place as a kind of second Sukkot. Maybe what we're seeing in this contrast of Beit Hamikdash built at Solomon's time in the fall holidays, but Mishkan built ostensibly in Moses' time in the spring holidays is like two mirror images. And maybe in ancient Israel, you had both of those mirror images. Maybe Shlomo builds the Beit Hamikdash b'Yerach HaEtanim in the month of the mighty, the seventh month, which is Tishrei, because that was like a parallel tradition.
It's God's month. Chodesh Hazel Lachem, Nisan is our month as a people, but the seventh month, all the holidays are in the seventh month. It's the seventh month belongs to God, and you know the temple is dedicated to God, and God is the God of the universe, not only the God of the Jewish people. But on that we can have a lot of an interesting debate. I'm just wondering, maybe as far as Parshat Chodesh is concerned, and with this we have a couple of minutes. Um, we're taking the hard turn to Passover, and not only is it being effectuated in beginning to do some cleaning and beginning to do some shopping for Passover, but we're also thinking about the Seder. We're thinking about what we're going to tell at the Seder and how we're going to tell the story again. I'm just maybe if you can you just as a kind of rapid response here, what what does this chapter 12, what are you pulling out for the Seder? What are you going to try and tell us for this? What part of this um you know text is saying to you, I need to talk about it some more, maybe. Is there anything in there that may be uh, functioning for you?
So for me, there are two things. The first thing has to do with the lamb itself, which has to be roasted whole. Unlike other sacrifices, which are sectioned and placed on the altar, this one, imagine, is on a spit turning around and is roasted whole. And why is that? And you must eat the whole thing that night because I think there's a difference between the celebration, as it were, of the Exodus, the anticipation of the Exodus, which is going to take place in the sealed room, as it were, of the ancient Israelite because they cannot go out of their house that night. And the next morning, following one of the traditions, when they're actually going to leave Egypt, they
Hmm.
have to be completely done with their lamb that they've sacrificed in God's name before they take a footstep towards freedom. And I find that striking because we often put them together as if the sacrifice was the Exodus. And
Interesting.
it's not. It comes before. And as I said, it's self-contained. And it's for us to derive meaning because when we sit at a Seder table, we are also self-contained. We invite people in, and I assume everyone will be with in their own home or in the home where they've been invited to be. And that's your Pesach experience that this year, that self-contained space.
Jeremy, anything come to you? I'm gonna pitch you one, okay?
Okay,
Pitch
good.
you a react to the word bayit and how bayit in this text and bayit meaning house. How does bayit function in as a theme in general for Pesach and in general for this moment? Um, give me
Bayit also means uh, in rabbinic parlance,
Wife.
wife and household. Selevet avot, selabayit.
labait.
It's a lamb per ancestral home. It's being a little bit poetic. It's one lamb per family. Im me'at habayit meheyot miseh. But if one bite is too small for a lamb, you bring your near neighbor. Hakarov el beito b'michsat nefashot. You bring the nearest neighbor to join in with you. So I always think, I mean, I say this a lot, that that near neighbor is um, uh, is that the kind of character that's lingering between the lines of this story. There's a pasuk in Mishlei, which if I have it right, I'll remember. It's Tov shachen karov me'ach rachok. Better is a nearby neighbor than a distant brother, and that just strikes me as an interesting uh, tension in all of our lives. Like we have far-flung family, we got people all over the place. We have the people we happen to live next door to who we're not connected to in the same way, but those are the people we're going to share the holiday with.
So I want you to pitch to me the word Chodesh, and I'm going to react to it. So,
What do you think when we tell this story? that it begins with the turn of a Chodesh. What does that mean to you?
So Chodesh, thank you for asking it. Chodesh is month, okay, and it's interesting how the word Chodesh kind of filters into the Haggadah, um, and the word Chadash is in the story. So I'm gonna do a quiz here. Chadash in the story, where does Chadash occur, and how does it?
Vayakom Melech Hadash.
New king, a new king. Everything turns over because of a new king. Uh,
Well, wait a second. Is
yes,
that the answer you were thinking of?
I am thinking of that.
Because
There's another
because
one.
because that is an excellent answer, and that was the bad Chadash,
Yes.
somebody who was disconnected from the past. But there's also the reason that Chodesh is Chadash, and this is not my chidush, but uh, it's of course the experience of a brand new moon, but it's a word that also applies, um, and now I have to verify that this is true. It is a halachically salient word. Is it a biblical usage? I have to just double check that. But it also refers to what Passover marks as an agricultural holiday, was that you now begin to eat
Hadash.
from the
Exactly.
new produce of that spring as opposed
Hadash.
to last year's grain.
Okay. Very good. Very good. So, and then in the Haggadah, there's also Yachomi Rosh Chodesh. You should start talking about, Passover from Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And because we're out of time, I want to use one more, which is there's a lovely line right before the little Hallel in the Magid part, which is Venomar Lefanav Shira Chadasha. May we all sing before God a new song. And
Amen.
that shir lana shir chadash shir. This is really crucial. It's so important that part of the newness is our own renewal, that we can sing a new song. May it be God's will.
So
Yeah.
may we lift our voices in new song, and may the new song lift us.
Amen, amen, amen. With that, we want to thank our viewers, our listeners for tuning in, for listening in. It means a lot to us. We've got a lot of play over, Barry, on your Facebook, close to 200 people listening, and YouTube, lots and lots of people. Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, through Anshe Chesed, lots and lots of people. So we thank each and every one of you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Wishing everyone a good Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh coming in on next Sunday. We're wishing and hoping again for our hostages to come home. And we hope to see you next week on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom.